So when we last left off here, the Autobots had successfully gotten their relics, while the Decepticons, unfortunately only have the Renaissance Blaster and the Requiem Blaster at the moment. And so this does kind of give Megatron a little bit of rage, but not even more so is the fact that not only is he dealing with the death of Oil Slick and Arachnid, but also the capturing of two formidable Decepticons in the likes of Skyquake and Striker at the hands of the Autobots. Hopefully, his luck will change. And so, where do we begin? Well, with all the relics caught, this leads to another episode here, that being the new recruit, with the Autobots going just like in canon to meet Smokescreen. However, some little deviations here. The regular Autobot team in canon actually goes as Jazz decides to stay behind with Cliffjumper, Wheeljack, and Jetfire in order to guard the prisoners here. Now, what are the state of the prisoners? Well, while Striker is in better physical condition than Skyquake, Skyquake is in a sort of, I guess you could say, tug of war with life and death, if you will. He's stable, but again, if he tries anything or takes any more damage, he's going to be taken offline. So Skyquake is in a position where, yeah, he's in a cell, but he's also on life support at the same time. So him trying anything wouldn't really help. And then there's Striker, who ultimately, is in a difficult position herself. She's formidable, yeah, but where would she go? How would she even escape? There's really nothing she could do in this situation. So when Smokescreen meets the other ones, or meets the Autobots, he does have a fanboy side. And when he meets the likes of Wheeljack and Jetfire, he immediately recognizes them and recognizes Cliffjumper talking about his adventures in the Sea of Rust with Prowl. And then when he sees Jazz, he's immediately shocked and introduces himself as Smokescreen. In that immediate motion, Jazz begins to have flashbacks almost of his Smokescreen, his protoform brother. He was different, yeah, he wasn't like him, he was still physically better. But Smokescreen had this uniqueness to him. He had an ability to where he could create these static clouds that could paralyze people, and yet he always had a heart, or at least a spark of gold, for being kind and compassionate. And so for a moment, Jazz freezes, kind of picturing his own Smokescreen right in front of him, but then snaps out of it and introduces himself here. And then when he finds out, or when Smokescreen finds out that he is currently Optimus' second in command, as he's pretty much proven it, he pretty much shapes up, salutes him, and well, everything kind of goes the same. This is where we actually have Jack and Sierra being the ones to tell him to go get a vehicle for him. And believe it or not, I actually do think that Smokescreen is a bit more disciplined. And the reason why I'm going to say this here is because there are a lot more leader figures here. There's Jetfire, Optimus's air commander, Jazz, Optimus's ground commander, his strategist and everything, and then there's Optimus Prime. While Smokescreen is definitely gutsy and wants to prove himself, he ultimately knows that it's not going to benefit him at the end of the day. And so, in all honesty, I can honestly say the episode kind of takes a different turn, with the Autobots actually getting some red energon a lot easier than the original, because Starscream is still with Megatron and hasn't betrayed him, or at least hasn't gotten the opportunity to do so. So with that being said here, yeah, the Autobots get red energon, and believe it or not, this is where Ratchet actually begins synthesizing it along with synthetic energon. However, a unique twist. Jetfire offers to help, as before the war, he was still a scientist. So this means that Ratchet is actually able to get a better concoction of not only red energon, but when Jetfire finds out he's been testing synthetic energon, or trying to make synthetic energon work, Jetfire immediately jumps on this. Is like, yo, we could have been doing this the whole time. Imagine us being stronger, faster, and tougher. To which Ratchet says, yeah, but our supply is limited. To which this is where Jazz says, back in his world, they used anything as energon. They could just make energy, even like, small things like electricity, into energon for them. To which Ratchet and Jetfire say, really? How'd you do that? Because energon's usually a raw material. To which it says, well, yeah, if we can discover what the properties are of synthetic energon, we could just apply it to regular energon, thus creating a new energon-like supplies, don't you think? To which this is where both of the bots begin thinking, and they're just like, dang, we never thought about here. But again, finding energon mines will also require us to take on Decepticons. To which Optimus says, okay, then that shouldn't be a problem in all honesty, right? They could easily take on Decepticons, especially what they have now. Megatron is in disarray, he's dysfunctional. As a matter of fact, it's very possible they could end the war far sooner than they think. To which this is where Jazz says to Optimus, you really sure you willing to do that? I mean, his Optimus, yeah, he definitely would have. But you're different. You're more kinder, more willing to reason with the enemy rather than just risking more countless lives. Do you want to do it? To which Optimus says, in given time, he definitely would. But right now, he feels like Megatron might be unredeemable at this point, and he doesn't know if he really wants to really just, kind of conversate with him at the moment here. But then again, with everything going smoothly here, I would actually say Smokescreen gets trained. And actually, he's also, I would actually say he's indoctrinated into a guard rotation. Now, considering the sheer fact that Skyquake is really not the threat there and Striker is, the Autobots would be having at least 2 members per shift. And so in his shift, he's partnered up with Wheeljack, thus giving him someone to, talk to. And well, Wheeljack doesn't mind reminiscing about the Wreckers. Now, let's move on to an episode Legacy, where this actually takes place a whole lot differently than the original, with Smokescreen being better trained and a better accustomed, plus being more disciplined with having 2 lieutenants and Optimus around. Smokescreen actually reports this back to Ratchet, to where the Autobots are all coming in, all in force, minus Ratchet, and I'm gonna have to say Jetfire on this one, where Megatron does try to take the weapon here. However, this is where the Autobots' numbers and ferocity just comes into play, laying into the rest of the Decepticons. And in all honesty, even if Knockout, Breakdown, Cyclonus, Spitter, and Blackout are there, they're outnumbered and even outskilled in this department, meaning that Optimus is actually able to get the Star Saber a lot easier. And well, this is where the Decepticons ultimately try to retreat. However, Jazz, feeling a little bit cocky, shoots Megatron in his thruster, grounding him. But before Megatron could call the others to get back, Jazz pounces on him along with Cliffjumper and Wheeljack, and they pretty much hold Megatron down and tear off his fusion cannon. And this is where Optimus is not only able to pull out the Star Saber, but pretty much puts it towards Megatron's throat, saying that he's lost and that he'll be coming with them. And so this means that the Decepticons have just lost Megatron. And this means only one person can honestly take over at the moment, that being Cyclonus. And Cyclonus is absolutely frustrated with himself here. He lost Megatron. He lost Skyquake. He's now lost his commander as well, Striker. And again, the Decepticons are just, honestly, they feel humiliated and disrespected. So when Megatron is walked towards base, Jazz promptly throws him onto the ground, and this allows Jetfire to cuff him, to which Megatron is actually placed in a cell opposite to, or at least in an area opposite to, Striker and Skyquake. So with Megatron pretty much captured here, this makes everything a lot easier henceforward. They might say, well, wouldn't Starscream try to take over? I would say no, he would definitely be terrified of Cyclonus at the moment, because again, Cyclonus is a very deadly Decepticon. And this is where we actually get the hunt for the keys. And so the first key, which is by the lake, I believe, is actually recovered pretty smoothly, with Jazz and RC being the ones to recover it and pretty much successfully defeating Knockout and Breakdown, despite they have the Renaissance Blaster. The next key is in Egypt, with Predaking and Blackout being the ones to go to it, along with, well, Spitter, because they do need some form of intelligence here. But this is actually beaten by the trio of the Wreckers, being Jetfire, Wheeljack, and Bulkhead, being able to not only successfully distract Predaking, but to pretty much get the relic itself. So this means the Autobots have 2 to the Decepticons 0. Now for the third key, this one being in the woods here, where Cyclonus and Starscream are the ones to apprehend it. As a matter of fact, they don't waste time. Once they find it, they get it and get out of there, leaving Optimus, Bumblebee, and Cliffjumper with some frustration, but they understand. But now there is the final key, and with Smokescreen being there, they're able to get it quite casually and quite easily. They're like, hey, we're just gonna reach into your chest and just pluck this out over here. We just gonna take it. Just, no diddy. We just gonna rip it out of you. And yeah, okay, there we go. We got ourselves the third key, right? Now they have to figure out how to get the third one. And this is where they actually begin conversating, brainstorming. However, they neglected one thing during this time, that being their guard rotations. You see, in this one, the Autobots are more confident. I would actually say borderline close to arrogance at this point. And so Megatron takes advantage of this here and begins strategizing with Stryker. However, there is one issue. Skyquake. He's injured. He's still on life support. And Megatron ultimately makes the decision to abandon him right then and there. And while Skyquake is in a more, disabled-like state, he hears this, and it hurts. His leader, the person he was willing to follow to the end, ultimately decides to abandon him right then and there. And so, on one day, while the Autobots are on their guard rotation, Megatron and Stryker wait for the weakest members to actually do it. This being, again, and while she's not, the weakest member, physically speaking, she's not contending with either of them. And this being RC and Smokescreen. So they both begin to, mess with their cufflinks a little bit here. And Stryker actually manages to get her cuffs off. And this is where RC, trying to intervene the best she can, tries to combat Stryker, but Smokescreen, in his attempt to help her, leaves Megatron to do the same thing. And so, when both the Decepticons break out here, this is where something tragic does happen. And Smokescreen is killed by Megatron, with him shoving his claws through his spark, killing him. But before RC can meet the same fate, with Stryker about to literally just crush her skull with her foot, this is where Jazz comes in and drop kicks Stryker away from RC and pretty much pulls her back. And when he sees the body of Smokescreen, he looks at Megatron with every amount of hate and rage that he has. And well, before Optimus can stop him, Jazz lunges at Megatron, tackling him. Both of them tumbling through the base, and they begin fighting viciously here. Just in a closed, while they are in an enclosed space here, they're just vicious. And Sierra is frightened. She's never seen Jazz this angry with someone. And she understands what happened. And seeing Smokescreen's lifeless body and RC almost hurt, he just tears into Megatron. And Megatron and vice versa. And actually, when they tackle each other, or when Megatron tackles him, he's able to get his hands on another relic, the Spark Extractor. And when he holds it up, he also has his foot on Jazz, pitting him firmly to the ground. And this is where he simply has the Spark Extractor, saying that they'll be taking their leave. And they'll be taking it now. And so, without any other choice here, Optimus allows Stryker and Megatron to slowly leave the base through a space bridge. And this actually teleports them, or transports them, to the Arctic, where they are able to escape. They don't take an Autobot hostage, as again, that'll escalate the situation. But holding the Spark Extractor with them, they are able to ultimately get away. And so they contact Cyclonus to come and pick them up here. However, this leaves one thing: Smokescreen being killed here. And unfortunately, Jazz is the one that takes it the hardest, as he can only think about his world, Smokescreen, his brother, whether it be protoform brother or brother through interaction. This is someone he cared about. And unfortunately, Megatron took him from, you know, from the Autobots and did it coldly. And RC places a hand on his shoulder, saying that he died a hero. And while Jazz understands that, he can't help but feel this anger inside of him, wanting to ultimately kill Megatron for what he's done. However, there's still one thing here, and that being Skyquake. And he looks at Skyquake with some discontent, but there's also a form of pity. And so Skyquake simply looks at him and states, "You understand now what I felt." To which Jazz gives him a nod and says, "Yeah, I do. But here's the thing. We can get you out of this." And this is where he offers his hand and asks Skyquake, "Join us. They abandoned you. And I'm guessing deliberately too. You could have a better chance at surviving, a better chance at coming out the winner in this war. Just do the right thing and join us." And this is where Skyquake ultimately shakes Jazz's hand, and in that instance, Optimus utilizes the Forge of Solus Prime to repair Skyquake. Now stronger and better than before, Skyquake now brandishes an Autobot insignia, joining Team Prime. Now, let me know what you guys think down below about this here, because I do think it would be interesting to have Skyquake at his weakest, being abandoned by his, well, so-called leader, someone he trusted and admired and aspired to follow, and yet he abandoned him like he was nothing. So ultimately, this kind of leads into another scenario. With the sheer fact that now the Decepticons only have one Omega key, they now have a foothold in the war. And ultimately, they say that Skyquake was a lost cause. Something that Megatron is going to have to figure out is going to bite him in the butt later. And so with this one key, they begin to try and figure it out. What is it? What does it do? However, Soundwave begins decrypting it further and shows that the final key was lodged in Smokescreen. To which he says, interesting. He didn't pull or feel anything when he gutted the Autobot spark. But nevertheless, their situation is just kind of what it is for right now. And so Megatron states that right now we need to consider something. And he looks at Shockwave and says, "How many Predacon fossils can you manufacture?" To which this is where Shockwave simply states, "However many you need, my liege." And this is where Megatron says, "Good. Then let's begin hunting for these relics, or hunting for these fossils." Now, the hunt for the Predacon fossils begins, with even the Autobots being in on this a lot earlier than the original. There are some back and forth escalations here, and so Jazz manages to wrestle Shockwave for a Predacon fossil, and well, brings it back to the Autobot base, and actually thinks to himself here, what if we make our own? And this is where Ratchet and Jetfire look at him like, okay, we're listening. Which says, you guys have you guys ever had beasts before? And this is where Bulkhead actually begins to explain, yeah, they had Dinobots before, led by Grimlock along with Slug, Snarl, Swoop, Sludge, and all that. But again, they don't know where they are at the moment. To which Jazz says, okay, cool. Now, what if we made our own Dinobots with Predacon DNA infused with dinosaur DNA? It's very possible that's how they were created in the first place, and then applying it to Autobots. To which this is where Ratchet says, okay, but how do you expect us to make it? To which this is where RC interjects and says, what about the Harbinger? We discovered it before. What if there's another half to it? To which this is where the Autobots actually do begin searching for it, and they find the Harbinger. The one where, honestly, if Ratchet found it in the original, I could definitely see the Autobots finding it. And this is also where, considering Starscream never found it, he never is able to get the protoforms. Meaning that the Autobots have, instead of 4 protoforms like in the original, or I think it was actually 5, Was it 5 or 4? Let me know down below. But obviously, I'm gonna, if it is changed here, if it is originally 4, we're gonna say there's 5. And so this is where Jazz has another idea and actually looks to the 4 kids and actually has them go ahead and extract DNA from any of the fossils that they find. And so Miko and even Raph, loving this here, they all head to the museum under the cover of night with Agent Fowler and actually begin extracting DNA from any fossil they want. And they get the following: a Megaraptor, a Giganotosaurus, an Empyrosaurus, a Shonisaurus, because that is the state fossil of Nevada, and a Chronosaurus. And so this is when Ratchet actually does begin construction of a laboratory at the military base that they originally had as an Autobot base in the original timeline. And so Ratchet begins construction of Project Dinobot, while Shockwave begins construction of Project Predacon. However, due to the Autobots' interference, he is only able to get 4 other Predacons, 4 other Predacon remains here. And again, I'm actually going to be going to the toy line for this one. These Predacons are Laserback, Grimwing, Skystalker, and the one female one, Ripclaw. And that's where we're going to leave it off here, you guys. Please comment down below, like, and subscribe, and share with your friends. This is Legendary Grimlock, and I hope you guys have a blessed day. Peace.